The night air around the edge of Missoula, Montana, was sharp with early autumn chill. Golden leaves skittered across the yard, carried by a restless wind. Inside the old ranch house, Grace stared at the small rise and fall of her son's chest, barely breathing herself, afraid that if she let out a sound, it might somehow jolt the delicate peace holding their world together. Her hands shook as she tucked the faded quilt tighter around Eli's thin body, her jaw set to keep her lips from quivering. Just months ago, Eli would have been outside, darting through the grass with a stick in his hand, a blur of life and laughter. Now he lay silent and still, his legs buried beneath layers of fabric and braces, robbed of motion by a sickness no doctor could name, much less cure. Beside Eli's bed, the quiet tick of the old clock sounded like a countdown. Medical supplies cluttered every surface, bottles, bandages, therapy tools, while the sweet scent of hay and sharp liniment drifted in from the cracked window. It was the only thing that masked the sterile odor of their new reality. Grace glanced at the sketch Eli had made weeks ago, taped to the lamp. In the drawing, a brown mare, Dusty, stood in a field, her body shielding a tiny, smiling stick boy. The lines were shaky, colored outside the margins, but the meaning was unmistakable. Eli missed his friend. Grace swallowed, her eyes burning. She bent down, brushed a stray curl from Eli's forehead, and whispered, "I promise, sweetheart, I'll never give up, not ever." A soft, desperate whinny split the night. Grace froze. There it was again, the sound trailing through the wind, haunting, urgent, coming from the paddock beyond the barn. She rose, wiped her palms on her sweatpants, and turned to the window. Tyler stood there, broad-shouldered, his silhouette tense and unmoving against the glass. His fists were clenched, knuckles white. The barn's lantern burned a gold halo in the darkness, outlining the restless brown shape of Dusty as she paced, tossing her head, breath steaming in the chill. Tyler's reflection in the window was grim, jaw locked, his eyes tracking every movement of the mare. He hadn't said more than a handful of words since Eli's diagnosis. Grace felt the distance between them, a canyon neither could cross. She wanted to reach out, say something, anything, but the words tangled inside her, weighed down by her own exhaustion and terror. The silence stretched, taut as a tripwire. Outside, Dusty's cries grew sharper. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, unsure whether it was from the cold or the fear that pressed in on all sides. It hadn't always been this way. Just a year ago, their home was alive with warmth and noise. Grace would be at the kitchen table, lesson plans spread out, Eli underfoot, drawing superheroes and asking endless questions. Tyler would come in, smelling of leather and sweat, wrap her in a bear hug, and toss Eli in the air until the boys' giggles filled every room. They were whole. Now even their memories felt fragile, like a song half remembered and fading. Grace's mind raced back to the day everything changed. Eli had woken up complaining his legs felt funny. By nightfall, he couldn't stand. The doctors were baffled. MRI, blood tests, spinal taps, all inconclusive. "It's rare, but sometimes children never recover," one specialist finally said, his eyes sliding away from Grace's as if ashamed. That night, Tyler had punched a hole in the drywall and left for hours, returning with dust in his hair and no explanation. Since then, the ranch had become a fortress of grief. Grace clung to hope with every fiber of her being, refusing to accept that this was the end of Eli's story. Tyler, once the most solid thing in her life, was slipping away, shutting down behind a wall of silent pain. Sometimes Grace caught him staring at Eli with a look that was almost anger, as if he blamed himself for letting the unthinkable happen. Tonight felt different. The wind howled through the eaves, and Dusty's pacing became frantic. Grace glanced back at Eli, his face so small against the pillows, eyelids fluttering in a dreamless sleep. She moved to the window beside Tyler, close enough to feel the tension in his body. "She's been like that all night," Tyler muttered, not looking at her. "Something's got her spooked." Grace followed his gaze. Dusty circled the paddock, her eyes never leaving the house. There was a wildness in her movements. Ears pinned, tail lashing, a silent plea. Grace's heart clenched. Dusty had been Eli's world before the illness, the one creature who could draw a laugh from him on the darkest day. Boarding her away while Eli was in the hospital had nearly broken him, but it seemed cruel to keep her close now, a reminder of everything Eli had lost. Grace bit back tears. "Maybe she knows," she whispered, mostly to herself. "Maybe she feels it too." Tyler let out a low sigh, shoulders slumping. For a moment, Grace saw the man she'd married. Not the hollowed-out stranger, but the stubborn, hopeful cowboy who'd once promised her forever. But the moment passed, and Tyler turned away, leaving her alone at the glass. A sudden gust rattled the pane. The lamp flickered. Grace pressed her forehead to the window and closed her eyes, desperate for something to break the cycle. Some sign, any sign, that hope still lived here. Behind her, Eli stirred, letting out a faint, almost imperceptible sound. Grace rushed back to his side. His hand twitched, searching in sleep for something she couldn't give. She traced her fingers over his drawing, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hold on, Eli. I'm right here. We'll find a way." Outside, Dusty's cry echoed, fierce and unwavering, across the empty fields. And in the darkness, a mother's promise began to gather strength. Morning broke with a cold, brittle light streaming across the kitchen floor. Grace moved through the cluttered house like a ghost, shuffling past the pile of unopened mail, the stacks of insurance paperwork, and the worn wheelchair parked by the table. The silence was punctuated only by the muted sound of cartoons playing on the old TV. Cheerful voices and canned laughter clashing with the heavy, hopeless air. Eli stared at his untouched bowl of oatmeal, lips pressed tight, shoulders hunched beneath his faded superhero t-shirt. Grace sat across from him, her hands trembling as she tried to coax another spoonful toward his mouth. "Come on, Eli. Just a few more bites," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. "You'll need your strength for therapy later. Please, sweetheart. For me." But Eli turned his head away, jaw clenched, eyes shining with a stubborn, silent misery. Grace felt her own patience slipping, worn thin by months of sleepless nights and endless medical appointments. The oatmeal grew cold in the bowl, the morning sun painting a harsh glare across the dishes left out from last night. A mug shattered in the sink, her own hand letting go before she realized how tight she'd been gripping it. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face shadowed with stubble, boots already on, jacket thrown over his broad shoulders. He watched the scene with a tight, closed expression. "Leave him be," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "He's not hungry." Grace snapped. "And what? Just let him waste away? He needs to eat, Tyler. He needs us not to hover over him every second," Tyler shot back, his own frustration barely contained. "That's easy for you to say," Grace fired, her voice rising. "You get to walk out whenever it gets too much." Tyler's jaw clenched. He grabbed his hat from the hook and stormed out, the back door slamming behind him so hard the glass rattled in the frame. The moment the door closed, Grace's anger dissolved into tears. She slumped over the table, shoulders shaking, feeling the raw edges of her marriage and her spirit all at once. Eli watched her, silent and unmoving, his hands limp in his lap. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. In the barn, Tyler threw himself into work, hauling heavy bales of hay, tossing them harder than necessary, sweat stinging his eyes. He kept at it until his arms burned and his breath came in ragged bursts. At last, he collapsed against the rough wooden wall, dropping to his knees, forehead pressed against the boards. He let the tears come, silent and hot, guilt and helplessness crushing him. He had always believed he could protect his family, fix what was broken, muscle through any pain. But now, every day felt like defeat. Grace wiped her eyes, pulling herself together for Eli's sake. She glanced at the calendar on the fridge, every square filled with appointments, physical therapy, neurology, counseling, insurance calls. The life she'd known was gone, replaced by a relentless grind of worry and routines that led nowhere. Later, as she wheeled Eli into the living room for his stretches, the phone buzzed with a reminder, "Dr. Owens, review new treatment options." Grace ignored it, her mind swirling with dread and resentment. She reached down to adjust Eli's brace, hands clumsy and cold. "Let's try moving your feet today, okay?" she said softly. Eli stared at the ceiling, not answering, not even looking at her. Grace's throat tightened. It was as if her son was slowly fading, shrinking into himself. She ached for a spark, some sign that the boy she loved was still in there. But all she saw was emptiness. The day crawled by. Tyler avoided the house, and when he returned, he and Grace barely spoke. Dinner was a silent affair, the clink of forks on plates the only sound. Grace felt trapped in her own home, alone even in Tyler's presence. Their love had become a casualty, buried beneath layers of blame and exhaustion. That night, after Eli had been settled in bed, Grace sat on the porch steps, head in her hands. The stars above were cold and distant, offering no comfort. She felt the weight of failure pressing down, a fear that Eli would never heal, that she would lose her son forever. Not to death, but to despair. She didn't hear the car until it pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the yard. Grace stood, wary and confused, as the door opened and her sister Lauren stepped out, a bundle of energy and messy hair. Lauren offered a tired, crooked grin. "Long night?" Grace tried to smile, wiping her eyes. "You could say that. What are you doing here?" Lauren gestured to the trailer hitched to her truck. Inside, the brown mare, Dusty, stood quietly, eyes calm and deep. "I thought Eli could use his friend again," Lauren said. "Figured Dusty might want to come home." Grace blinked in surprise. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She looked at Dusty, at the way the mare's ears pricked forward, how she pawed the ground in recognition. Something shifted in Grace's chest, an ache but also a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in months. She threw her arms around Lauren, hugging her tight. "Thank you," she whispered, voice raw. "You have no idea." Lauren just squeezed back. "We all need a little help sometimes." The commotion woke Eli. He watched from the window as Dusty was led into the paddock, his eyes wide, a trace of the old spark flickering to life. Grace caught his expression, her heart leaping. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe bringing Dusty home could give Eli the hope he needed. And maybe, if Grace dared to believe, it could give her the strength to keep fighting too. As the moon rose over the Montana fields, Dusty nickered softly, her gaze fixed on the house. Inside, the first thread of hope wound itself through the despair. Fragile, but enough to hold on to for one more night. The next morning dawned clearer, the golden haze of sunlight melting the last chill from the fields. Grace woke to the unusual sound of quiet in the house. No dishes rattling, no voices raised in frustration. For the first time in weeks, there was only the soft shuffle of Eli's breathing and the distant, steady crunch of hooves in the paddock. She drew a deep breath, savoring the faint scent of coffee and fresh hay drifting in through the open window. It almost felt normal, almost. In the kitchen, Lauren had already set out a fresh pot and 2 mismatched mugs, a small gesture that felt like an anchor in the storm. "Coffee?" Lauren asked, her voice gentle, eyes searching Grace's face for cracks. "God, yes." Grace managed a grateful smile, wrapping her hands around the mug. They sat together in silence, watching the autumn light play across the mess of therapy tools and homework papers. Every so often, Lauren would glance at Grace, as if waiting for the right words, but neither pressed. Outside, Dusty's deep brown coat gleamed as she paced along the fence, tail flicking, ears pricked toward the house. Eli was quiet at breakfast, but his eyes were brighter than they'd been in weeks. He glanced again and again at the window, where Dusty's form passed by like a slow-moving shadow. Grace noticed, hope flaring in her chest. She spooned oatmeal into his bowl, careful not to say too much, not to scare away the fragile curiosity blooming on his face. After breakfast, Grace wheeled Eli to the front window. Dusty, as if sensing her cue, ambled up to the fence and lowered her head, blowing out a soft, rumbling breath. Her eyes were dark and wise, focused intently on Eli. Grace watched, her heart pounding. Eli stared at Dusty. For a long moment he was still, almost wary, as if afraid the mare might vanish if he blinked. Then, slowly, Eli lifted his hand and pressed it against the cold glass. Dusty let out a gentle nicker, ears flicking forward. She took a step closer, her breath fogging the window, leaving a warm, damp circle just inches from Eli's outstretched fingers. Grace swallowed hard, tears threatening. She looked over her shoulder and caught Lauren's eye. They shared a look of cautious hope. No words needed. The hours crept by. Dusty refused to wander far from the house, pacing the same small stretch of paddock, occasionally nickering toward Eli's window. Grace made notes on the subtle changes. Eli watched Dusty for hours, tracking her every movement, his lips sometimes moving in silent conversation. His shoulders sat a little higher, his eyes a little less clouded by sadness. Later, Grace brought Eli outside, bundled in blankets against the crisp wind. She parked his wheelchair near the fence, her heart racing. Dusty approached, slow and deliberate. She stopped just out of reach and lowered her head, blowing softly. Eli stared, his fingers twitching on the armrest. "Hi, girl." Eli's voice was barely more than a whisper, but Dusty's ears flicked. She stretched her nose forward, nostrils flaring, until they almost touched. Grace watched, hands folded across her chest, holding herself together. She saw something pass between child and horse, a silent understanding, a recognition born of shared pain and loneliness. It felt like a small miracle. Lauren crouched down beside Eli, her voice low. "She missed you, bud. I think she's been waiting for you." Eli's eyes shimmered, a smile breaking through for the first time in months. Grace's own heart leapt at the sight, a mix of joy and terror, afraid to hope too much, afraid it might all disappear. Inside that fragile peace, the day unfolded gently. Grace took photos from the porch as Dusty lingered by Eli, never straying far. She sent one to Tyler, who was out running errands, along with a short message. He smiled today. He really smiled. Tyler replied hours later, only a single word, but it was enough to make Grace's heart ache. Home. As dusk fell, Grace carried Eli back inside. She sat with him as he drew new pictures, always of Dusty, always together. His lines were surer, his colors brighter. That night, Grace found herself staring at the sketches, feeling the smallest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. But hope was a fragile thing, and Grace couldn't help the gnawing fear that it was only a matter of time before disappointment came crashing back. She was afraid to believe in miracles, to let herself dream that Dusty could somehow help Eli heal. Still, when she tucked Eli in, she saw the new drawing taped beside his bed and couldn't stop herself from smiling. In the quiet of the night, Grace wandered outside, letting the cool air clear her head. She watched Dusty, who stood in the paddock, calm and still, eyes turned toward the house. The horse didn't whinny, didn't pace. She simply waited, patient and steadfast. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, letting out a slow breath. She realized, for the first time in months, that she wasn't entirely alone. Dusty was there, a silent guardian at the edge of their world. And maybe with enough patience and faith, they would find a way through the darkness, together. A gentle peace began to settle over the ranch, like dew after a long drought. Day by day, the world outside Eli's window softened, golden sunlight slanting through the glass each morning and painting a warm patch on his bedspread. The wind no longer felt menacing, but soothing, a companion to the quiet hum of life returning to the farmhouse. The season pressed forward, leaves turning amber and ochre, the last hay cut and baled, a chill sharpening the evening air. Dusty was always there. Each morning, before Grace even poured her first cup of coffee, she found the brown mare waiting near the fence, her gentle eyes fixed on the house. It was as if Dusty had appointed herself as Eli's sentry, standing guard no matter the weather. Sometimes Grace wondered if the horse ever slept at all. She began keeping notes in a battered spiral notebook, jotting down the smallest changes, a rare smile from Eli, a question about Dusty's breakfast, a laugh that sounded almost like the boy he once was. These details were treasures now, fragile proof that hope was not a foolish thing. She pinned each new drawing Eli made to the wall beside his bed, the collection growing, always Dusty and Eli together, standing in fields of wildflowers, sometimes joined by a shaky rendering of Grace or Tyler. The days found a rhythm. After breakfast, Grace would wheel Eli to the window and open it wide, letting in the crisp air. Dusty would trot over, lowering her head so Eli could stroke her velvety nose through the slats. At first, Eli was hesitant, his hand trembling, touch feather-light. But as the days passed, his movements grew surer. Sometimes when Grace wasn't looking, she caught Eli whispering secrets to Dusty, his face animated, eyes bright. The old, aching sadness that had once dulled his features began to fade. Tyler, who'd kept his distance in recent weeks, started spending more time at home. He'd pause on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the unlikely pair. One afternoon he joined them, standing just behind Eli as Dusty nudged a treat from his palm. Tyler's eyes were red when he finally turned away, but there was a softness to his voice Grace hadn't heard in months. Family dinners became a new tradition. They gathered at the kitchen table, sometimes joined by Lauren, sometimes just the three of them. Laughter, once rare and brittle, grew easier. Eli would tell stories about Dusty's imagined adventures, and Tyler would share tales from his own childhood on the ranch. The kitchen filled with the scent of fresh bread and apple pie, the air thick with something precious and tender, belonging. But under the happiness, a thin layer of fear remained. Grace felt it every time Eli tried a new movement and winced, every time she checked the calendar and saw the next doctor's appointment. She was afraid to hope too much, worried that any progress could be taken away as quickly as it had come. Still, she couldn't ignore the difference Dusty made. Eli slept better, smiled more, and, most telling of all, no longer fought her when it was time for therapy. One morning, Grace watched as Eli lifted his hand, not just to pet Dusty, but to wave at Tyler across the yard. Tyler grinned, dropped his tools, and jogged over, scooping Eli up in his arms and spinning him around, while Dusty snorted in approval. The moment felt ordinary, yet Grace knew it was extraordinary, a memory she would return to again and again. At night, after Eli fell asleep, Grace and Tyler would sit together on the porch. Sometimes they talked about their fears, about the future, about the things they'd left unsaid. Other nights they sat in silence, hands linked, hearts mending slowly in the gentle dark. One such night, Tyler broke the quiet. "She's changing us, you know, not just Eli, all of us." Grace nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep in her chest. "Maybe that's what healing looks like," she replied. "Not a miracle overnight. Just this, us trying, not giving up." As the days grew shorter, Dusty's presence continued to work its quiet magic. The horse seemed to sense Eli's moods, growing still when he was tired, playful when he had energy. Grace noticed how the mare positioned herself so Eli could lean on her when he was outside, offering silent strength and comfort. The bond between them was undeniable, a language of touch and trust no one else fully understood. Thanksgiving came early that year, an impromptu celebration with pumpkin pie, candles, and stories shared around the kitchen table. Eli insisted that Dusty receive her own feast, carrots and apples, which he fed her himself, giggling as she lipped them from his hand. That night, Grace wrote a final note in her journal before bed. "Today, Eli laughed so hard he cried. Tyler and I held each other and didn't let go. Dusty waited outside his window until he fell asleep. I think, for the first time, we're all learning how to live again." In the quiet darkness, Grace peeked in on Eli one last time. She traced the drawings on his wall and kissed his forehead, her heart full, not with certainty but with hope. And outside, beneath a blanket of stars, Dusty stood sentinel, a gentle promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The wind changed before sunset, coming off the mountains sharp and restless, rattling the porch swing and sending the horses in the pasture to higher ground. By late afternoon, clouds gathered over the open fields, dense and purple as bruises. Grace watched the sky from the kitchen, nerves on edge. Her hands moved without thinking, stacking plates, tidying counters, checking on Eli, who sat by the window tracing patterns in the condensation with his finger. Dusty, unsettled by the coming storm, paced the paddock, head raised, ears flicking at every distant clap of thunder. Her deep brown coat was already slick with anxiety, nostrils flaring as she circled and circled, never straying far from the house. Tyler, sensing the tension in the air, went out early to check the barn, tightening doors, throwing down extra straw, making sure everything that could be tied down was secure. Grace glanced at the clock, feeling the familiar weight of unease that had shadowed her for months. The ordinary now felt perilous. Each rumble of thunder seemed like a challenge. How much more could they take? She looked at Eli, who seemed small in his wheelchair, face half hidden behind his drawing of Dusty. She tried to smile. "Storm's coming, buddy. Let's keep the window closed tonight, okay?" Eli nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed outside, watching Dusty through the glass, as if they shared some secret only the two of them could understand. As the wind picked up, Grace drew the curtains, switching on the old lantern they kept for emergencies, its light golden and soft. She busied herself, humming under her breath, trying to keep the fear from seeping in. Dinner was a hurried affair, the family quiet, forks scraping plates as the first fat drops of rain spattered the roof. Tyler's movements were tense, every sound setting his jaw tighter. Lauren sent a quick message. Roads were bad. She'd stay in town, be back in the morning. Grace nodded to herself, grateful for the warning. The fewer people out in this storm, the better. Sartang slashed the sky, illuminating the paddock in stark, brief flashes. Each time Dusty's form appeared, restless, moving, her whinnies grew sharper, rising above the howl of wind. Eli gripped his blanket, his small hand white-knuckled with worry. The power flickered. Grace's heart skipped. "Just a storm," she said, forcing her voice steady. "We're safe here, nothing to be scared of." But outside, Dusty's agitation built to a frenzy. She galloped the perimeter of the fence, hooves churning mud, mane flying, her cries desperate and loud. Thunder boomed, rattling the window panes. Grace's nerves frayed, fear mixing with an old sense of helplessness. Then, suddenly, Dusty broke from her circuit and planted herself beneath Eli's window, tossing her head, whinnying over and over, loud enough to shake the glass. Grace moved to shoo her away, but Eli cried out, "No, don't! Please, Mom! Let her stay!" The urgency in Eli's voice stopped her. She hesitated, searching his face. He looked different, animated, focused, eyes wide and burning with something fierce. Grace knelt beside him. "She's scared, honey, just like you. But she's trying to tell us something." Eli pressed both hands against the glass. Face so close his breath fogged the pain. Dusty's muzzle nearly touched the other side. There was an intensity to their connection that Grace couldn't name, something wild and ancient. The lantern flickered again, shadows leaping across the room. A new sound, a low, startled gasp. Grace whirled to see Eli's hand twitch. Not just a tremor, but a deliberate, visible motion. His fingers flexed against the window, straining toward Dusty. For a moment, time stood still. Rain lashed the house. Ross stared, disbelief warring with hope. Then Eli let out a cry, half shock, half joy. "Mom, my toes! I feel my toes!" Grace lunged forward, yanking back the blankets. Tyler burst into the room, drawn by the commotion. Grace reached down, hands trembling, and saw it. Eli's right foot moving beneath the covers. Just a flutter, but undeniable. Tyler dropped to his knees, reaching for Eli's leg. "Move them again, son. Come on, let me see." Eli squeezed his eyes shut, brow furrowed in concentration. The movement came again, a tiny, miraculous spasm of life. Grace clapped a hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Tyler made a broken sound, a laugh, a sob, both at once. Dusty's whinny split the night, triumphant. For the first time in months, hope flooded the house, raw and overwhelming. Grace gathered Eli in her arms, clutching him close, heart pounding. Tyler wrapped them both in a fierce embrace, voice thick. "I knew you could do it, kid. I knew you could." Outside, the storm began to break. The rain softened, wind falling away, as if the world itself had paused in witness. Eli looked up at his parents, wonder shining in his eyes. "She helped me," he whispered. "Dusty helped." Grace met Tyler's gaze, both of them shaken to the core. Was it only coincidence? A surge of adrenaline? A fluke of nerves? Or had something more passed between child and horse in the storm? They didn't speak the questions aloud. In that moment, there was only awe. Eli's small, miraculous movement had cracked open the darkness, letting light pour in. For the rest of the night, Grace sat by Eli's side, afraid to let go, afraid this hope might vanish if she looked away. Tyler stood watch at the window, Dusty's steady silhouette a comfort beneath the starlight. No one slept. No one dared. But as dawn broke, Grace dared to believe something had changed, and maybe, just maybe, the miracle was only beginning. By the time the morning sun melted the last puddles from the storm, the mood inside the ranch house had shifted. There was a nervous excitement in the air, something unspoken but palpable, like the world had tilted slightly, letting in a bit more light. Grace woke, stiff from sleeping upright in the armchair beside Eli's bed. But she didn't care. She'd watched him all night, fingers twitching, toes flexing beneath the blanket, as if he were chasing some long-lost dream. For the first time since the illness, she dared to hope the nightmare might finally be breaking. Eli was already awake, wide-eyed and grinning, wiggling his toes under the quilt. "Watch, Mom!" He concentrated, face scrunched in effort. His right foot moved again, small, determined. Grace clapped her hands together, beaming through fresh tears. "That's incredible, honey. That's just incredible." Tyler stood in the doorway, hair mussed, coffee forgotten in his hand, watching the scene with a look Grace couldn't quite read. There was pride there, but also fear, the fear of losing this new hope as quickly as it had come. The morning became a blur of phone calls. Grace phoned Dr. Owens, who listened in shock. "Describe what you're seeing," he asked, voice suddenly alert. Grace could barely keep the tremor from her words as she explained. The doctor's response was cautious but encouraging. "Bring him in today. Let's get some tests. But Grace, this is remarkable progress. Truly." The news brought Lauren running, cheeks flushed with excitement as she burst into the kitchen. She swept Eli into a careful hug, laughing and crying all at once. "I told you Dusty was magic," she teased, ruffling his hair. Eli grinned up at her, the old mischief back in his eyes. Therapy that afternoon was different, brighter, almost playful. The living room transformed into a gymnasium, colorful mats, resistance bands, beanbags, and Dusty's old halter hanging by the door like a good luck charm. Eli tried new movements, rolling from side to side, gripping a rubber ball in each hand, pushing himself to sit up. Every small victory brought a cheer from Grace, Lauren, and even Tyler, who knelt on the floor to help Eli balance, his encouragement surprisingly gentle. At one point, Eli insisted, "Let's show Dusty." Grace wrapped him in a blanket and wheeled him outside. Dusty was waiting, as always, by the fence. Eli lifted his leg, grinning, and kicked his foot in the air. "Look, girl, I can do it." Dusty let out a low, pleased nicker, tossing her mane. The sight made Tyler laugh, an honest, belly-deep sound Grace hadn't heard in months. The next week became a blur of progress. Eli's muscles strengthened. He could now grip with both hands, roll over on his own, and even push himself to a sitting position. Each day brought new challenges, but Eli attacked them with fierce determination. The doctors ran every test they could think of. "Medically, this doesn't make sense," one neurologist admitted, marveling at the charts. "But whatever you're doing, keep doing it." In the evenings, Grace and Tyler sat on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, sipping tea and watching the sunset. The silence between them was no longer sharp, but gentle, a space where hope could breathe. One night, Lauren joined them, her voice soft. "I've never seen Eli so alive. I don't know what changed, but I think Dusty's a healer. She's given him something we couldn't." Grace nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. She hugged Lauren, her own tears coming quick. "Thank you for bringing her home. I don't know how we would have made it without you." Inside, Eli was drawing again, picture after picture of Dusty, of the house, of his family. His world, once small and gray, was filling with color again. Yet underneath the joy ran a new current of fear. Grace felt it in the way she hovered at Eli's side, in the way Tyler's voice sometimes caught on the word miracle. They were afraid to hope too much, afraid of what might happen if Eli's progress stalled, or, worse, reversed. Every time Eli struggled with a new movement, Grace's heart pounded, terror coiling in her chest. What if this miracle faded? What if she let herself believe, only to be crushed again? One evening, as the sun dipped low, Tyler found Grace standing by the fence watching Dusty graze. He reached out, laying a hand gently on her shoulder. "We're all scared, you know," he said quietly, "but we can't live waiting for the worst. Not anymore. We need to enjoy what we've got, while we've got it." Grace nodded, tears springing to her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she let herself lean into Tyler's side, letting him hold her close. That night, she tucked Eli in, smoothing his hair back. He looked up at her, his face open, vulnerable. "Will I ever walk again, Mom?" Grace hesitated, feeling the old fear threaten. She forced herself to smile, brushing a kiss across his forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart. But you're already doing things the doctors said you couldn't. That's something, right?" Eli grinned. "Yeah, maybe Dusty can help me learn to run again, too." Grace laughed, and for the first time in months it felt real. Maybe she can, baby. Maybe she can. As she turned out the light, Grace felt a new strength inside her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to hope. Outside, Dusty stood beneath Eli's window, her breath steaming in the cool air. A silent guardian, watching over them all. As October deepened, the mood in the old ranch house shifted from survival to something close to joy. The heavy fog of fear and grief began to lift, letting in the gentle warmth of hope. It started subtly, a shared smile over morning coffee, a new lightness in Tyler's footsteps, Eli's laughter drifting through the rooms like music. Dusty's steady presence outside, ever watchful and calm, seemed to anchor them all, a living reminder that miracles sometimes wore hooves and brown coats. Eli's recovery picked up pace. Each therapy session brought new triumphs. First, the wobbly but determined effort to push himself from his wheelchair into his father's arms. Then, gripping the windowsill with trembling hands, fighting gravity to stand. Just for a heartbeat, but long enough to spark wild applause from the whole family. Lauren filmed every milestone, sending videos to doctors, friends, and anyone who would listen. Each reply was a chorus of astonishment and celebration. The house became a place of gathering again. Friends dropped off casseroles, neighbors stopped by with pies or fresh eggs. Tyler, who had once retreated from visitors, now welcomed them with easy laughter and stories about Eli's progress. Evenings were filled with board games and country music from the old radio. Sometimes, Lauren and Grace would dance in the kitchen, twirling to some silly song, laughter echoing off the linoleum. One crisp evening, after a day of successful physical therapy, Tyler suggested a family dinner on the porch. They set the table with mismatched plates, mugs of steaming cider, and bowls of chili. Dusty stood nearby, grazing contentedly, her ears twitching to the rhythm of their laughter. Eli, wrapped in a thick flannel blanket, watched the sunset with bright eyes, holding his mother's hand. As the first stars appeared, Tyler stood and reached for Grace. "Dance with me?" he asked, his voice warm. She hesitated, self-conscious, a little shy after so many months of distance. But Eli chimed in, "Go on, Mom." So Grace let herself be led into the moonlit yard, the grass soft beneath their feet, Dusty and Eli watching from the porch. Tyler held her close, humming an old tune. For a moment, everything else, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, fell away. It was just the two of them again, moving together, rediscovering each other in the hush of the Montana night. Afterward, Grace leaned against Tyler's shoulder, her voice low. "I missed this. I missed us." He kissed her forehead. "Me too. We're getting there, Grace. One step at a time." Meanwhile, inside the house, Lauren helped Eli to his feet. Supported gently by her arms, he shuffled awkwardly but determinedly toward the door. "I want to go see Dusty," he said, voice filled with hope. Lauren smiled, guiding him onto the porch. Dusty ambled over, lowering her head so Eli could stroke her velvety muzzle. Eli beamed, standing a moment longer than before. "She likes when I'm standing up," he said, giggling as Dusty snorted softly, her breath warm on his hand. Grace and Tyler watched from the yard, holding each other as Eli's voice rose in triumph. "Look, Mom! Look, Dad! I'm standing, really standing, with Dusty!" Tyler wiped his eyes, unable to hide his emotion. "You sure are, champ. You sure are." That night, the family gathered by the fire. Eli showed off his newest drawings, one of Dusty wearing a superhero cape, another of the whole family riding together across a field of golden grass. Grace tacked them up on the fridge, the paper bright against the old, faded magnets. Later, as the house settled into a peaceful hush, Grace and Tyler sat together in Eli's room, watching him drift to sleep. Dusty's silhouette stood just outside the window, a calm, protective figure in the moonlight. Grace reached for Tyler's hand. "Do you think she really knows what she's doing?" she whispered, glancing out at Dusty. Tyler shrugged, smiling softly. "I don't know, but I do know she's changed everything for us. For Eli, for you, for me. I never thought we'd feel whole again. I guess I forgot that healing isn't just about bodies. It's about hearts, too." Grace leaned against him, a sense of peace settling over her. She thought of all they'd lost, the carefree days, the easy laughter, but also of everything they'd rebuilt, a family stitched back together by hope, stubbornness, and the unwavering loyalty of a brown mare who refused to give up on them. The next morning, Eli woke early, eager for another session with Dusty. Tyler lifted him out of bed, marveling again at how much stronger his son felt, how his arms wrapped tight around his neck with new energy. Together they stepped out into the brisk air. The grass sparkled with dew, the sky blushed pink and orange. Dusty whinnied a soft greeting, her eyes bright. Eli looked at his parents, pride glowing in his face. "Today I want to walk to the fence by myself," he declared. Grace and Tyler exchanged a look, part worry, part awe, then nodded, ready to catch him if he stumbled. With shaky determination, Eli set one foot in front of the other, bracing himself with a cane and his father's steady hand. Each step was a victory, each breath a celebration. When he reached Dusty, he threw his arms around her neck, burying his face in her mane. Grace watched, her heart overflowing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. As long as they faced it together, anything seemed possible. A week of joy passed in a golden blur. Every day brought new milestones. Eli's steps grew steadier, his laughter louder, and the whole family seemed to move with a lightness that had been missing for so long. Tyler went back to mending fences in the pasture. Lauren spent more time at the ranch, and Grace found herself humming in the kitchen, hope coloring everything she did. Even Dusty, sensing the change, seemed more playful, tossing her mane and trotting the fence line, letting Eli brush her sides every morning. The house, once haunted by silence, now overflowed with noise and life. Then, almost as if fate couldn't let them have too much peace, everything changed in a single night. It started with a cough, just a small, scratchy sound from Eli as Grace tucked him in. "You okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft. Eli nodded, eyes already drifting shut. She brushed his hair back, dismissing the worry as nothing more than allergies or a bit of autumn cold. But by midnight, Eli's breathing was shallow and fast, and his forehead burned beneath Grace's hand. Tyler woke to Grace's urgent voice. Together they checked his temperature, 102, then 103. Eli shivered, moaning softly, his skin hot and dry. Panic surged in Grace's chest. "Get the truck," she told Tyler, fighting to keep calm. "We're taking him in, now." Lauren, awakened by the noise, wrapped Eli in a blanket while Tyler carried him out to the truck. Dusty's head appeared over the fence, ears back, nickering anxiously. As they sped down the dark road to Missoula, the world shrank to the sound of Eli's ragged breaths and Grace's whispered prayers. The hospital was bright and cold, full of the sharp smell of antiseptic and fear. Doctors and nurses moved quickly. Oxygen, IV fluids, blood work. Grace sat by Eli's bed, her hands clutched tight, unable to do anything but watch as machines beeped and monitors flashed. Tyler stood in the corner, arms crossed, jaw clenched, his whole body vibrating with helplessness. Hours passed, each one an eternity. The fever refused to break. Eli drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes waking with a frightened cry. "I want to go home," he whimpered once. Grace bit her lip until it bled, brushing tears away. "You will, sweetheart, just as soon as you're better." Outside, the morning crept in, gray and unforgiving. Lauren brought coffee, but no one touched it. Grace barely noticed when her sister slipped away, but then from the window she saw her. Lauren standing outside the hospital with Dusty, who'd been trailered in as soon as the sun was up. People stared at the sight. A woman and a brown mare in a city parking lot, Dusty's breath steaming in the morning chill. But Lauren ignored the looks. She stroked Dusty's nose, whispering reassurances, refusing to leave as if her presence alone could help Eli from across the glass and concrete. Inside, Grace felt her composure crack. She went out for air, the chill biting her cheeks, and leaned against Dusty's broad neck. For a long moment, she just sobbed, letting go of the fear and exhaustion. Dusty nickered softly, standing still, warm and strong beneath Grace's trembling hands. Back upstairs, Tyler stayed by Eli's bedside, holding his hand and murmuring stories, memories of campfires, of the first time Eli rode Dusty, of the silly games they'd played on long summer afternoons. For the first time, Tyler let the tears fall, apologizing in a hoarse whisper. "I'm sorry I shut down, kiddo. I was just scared. I should have been there for you and your mom. I will be from now on." The day dragged. Doctors didn't have answers. Grace and Tyler watched the minutes crawl by, their unity tested by helplessness and dread. But this time, instead of falling apart, they leaned on each other, holding hands, sharing quiet words of comfort, refusing to let despair win. As dusk fell, Eli's fever finally broke. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breath slowed, coming easier, deeper. Grace pressed her hand to his cheek, cool at last. Relief crashed over her, leaving her weak with gratitude. Tyler squeezed her shoulder, and Lauren, having waited with Dusty all day, burst into the room with the news. "He's going to be okay," Grace whispered, voice shaking. "He's going to be okay." That night, The family crowded into the hospital room, talking in hushed voices, eating takeout from paper bags. They told stories and made plans for the day Eli could go home. Through the window, Dusty's shape could be seen in the parking lot, patient and steadfast. Her head lowered, eyes closed, as if she, too, was praying. When morning finally arrived, the doctors marveled at Eli's recovery. "He's a tough one," one nurse said with a smile. "He must really want to get back to that horse." Grace hugged Tyler and Lauren, overwhelmed by the realization that while fear would always be part of their lives, it didn't have to rule them. Their unity, tested and battered, had held. If anything, the ordeal had made them stronger, more determined to face whatever came next, together. On the day Eli was discharged, Dusty stood waiting by the truck, ears forward, tail swishing. Eli's smile was weak, but it was real. Grace lifted him into her arms and carried him to the paddock, where Dusty nuzzled his face, breathing him in, as if counting his heartbeats with her own. The journey was still uncertain. Recovery wasn't a straight line, and setbacks would come. But as the family drove home through the Montana morning, Dusty trotting alongside the fence, Grace knew they had crossed a threshold. They'd faced the storm together and found their way back to hope. The rain fell gently on the old ranch house, its patter on the porch roof soothing, almost like a lullaby. The storm outside was no longer something to fear, but a backdrop to a night filled with quiet reflection. Inside, the world felt slowed down, cocooned by the soft hum of family. Dishes from a late dinner dried on the rack, and Eli's laughter lingered in the air like perfume. Grace sat alone at the kitchen table, Dusty's worn leather bridle cradled in her lap. She turned the piece over and over, fingertips tracing the faded tooling in the leather. For months, she'd clung to hope, gritted her teeth through despair, and kept her hands busy, always busy, because sitting still meant feeling the pain, the fear of losing Eli, of failing as a mother, as a wife. Now, in the hush of the evening, those old anxieties tugged at her again. She barely noticed Tyler enter until he set a mug of tea on the table, steam curling into the cool air. He slid into the seat across from her, holding an old family photo, a candid shot of the three of them from a time before the illness. Eli sat on Tyler's shoulders, both of them covered in mud. Grace mid-laugh, her hair wild in the wind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the distant shuffle of Lauren settling Eli for bed. Then Tyler broke the silence. "You remember this?" he asked, voice soft as he tapped the photo. Grace nodded, her eyes shining. "It was the last good summer, before everything changed." Tyler slid the photo closer, his voice rough. "I keep thinking about how strong you were, how strong you are. I thought I had to be the rock. Didn't realize all I was doing was shutting you out. I thought if I just kept quiet, kept moving, maybe the pain wouldn't get me. But I was wrong. You can't outrun it." Grace let out a shuddering breath, staring at Dusty's bridle. "I was scared all the time. Still am some days. I felt like if I ever let myself break down, the whole family would fall apart." She traced the curve of the bridle, her voice a whisper. "I was angry at the world, at you, at myself. I didn't know what else to do but keep trying." Tyler reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I should have said it sooner. I'm sorry. For everything. For disappearing. For making you carry it all. I guess I thought strength meant holding it in. But seeing Eli fight, seeing you fight, I realize now it's okay to need help, to lean on each other." Grace smiled through her tears, the weight on her chest easing a little. "We were never meant to do this alone. I see that now. The rain eased outside, a soft breeze carrying the scent of wet earth and hay. Grace glanced out the window. In the first light of dawn, she could just make out Dusty's shape in the paddock, standing guard as always, patient and unmovable. I think Dusty taught us more than any doctor or therapist ever could, Grace mused. She never left, no matter how hard things got. She didn't judge us or demand anything. She was just there, steady. Maybe that's what love is supposed to look like. Tyler nodded, thoughtful. Maybe that's what saved us. Letting ourselves feel it all. The pain, the fear, the hope. Letting Dusty back, letting Lauren help. Letting each other in. We were never going to fix everything. But we didn't have to. Grace squeezed his hand. We learned to live with the pain instead of running from it. To make space for it. And for each other. Just then, a burst of laughter came from down the hall. Eli giggling as Lauren chased him, the sound bright and alive. Grace let herself savor it, the simple miracle of her son's joy. Sunrise crept across the fields. Tyler and Grace stepped out onto the porch, mugs in hand, to greet the day. The sky was streaked pink and gold, the air fresh and full of possibility. Eli appeared, still in pajamas, carrying his latest drawing. A picture of Dusty, Eli, Grace, and Tyler standing together beneath a rainbow, hand in hand. "Look, Mom," Eli beamed, holding up the picture. "We're all together. Dusty, too." Grace hugged him close, marveling at the strength in his arms, the warmth in his cheeks. Tyler ruffled Eli's hair, pride in his eyes. "Looks just right, buddy. That's our family." The morning passed in a swirl of small joys. Grace making pancakes while Eli set the table, Tyler mending a gate with Lauren's help, Dusty waiting patiently for her treat of apples and carrots. Everything felt brighter, each moment more precious, every ordinary act made extraordinary by the hard road they'd walked to get here. In the quiet that followed, Grace sat by the window watching Eli and Dusty in the yard. Eli brushed the mare's coat, his hands sure and gentle. Dusty stood perfectly still, lowering her head so Eli could reach, her patience endless. Grace reflected on their journey. Healing, she realized, wasn't about erasing scars or pretending the pain never happened. It was about finding meaning in the struggle, allowing themselves to be vulnerable, to accept help, to love each other fiercely despite fear. Dusty's unwavering presence had shown them all the power of quiet companionship, of steadfastness in the face of adversity. She understood now. Real resilience wasn't about surviving alone. It was about choosing every day to face the storm together, to open their hearts to the hard moments, and to the joy that sometimes followed. As the morning sun rose higher, Grace whispered a silent thank you to Dusty, to her family, to whatever power had carried them this far. She knew there would still be challenges, setbacks, and tears. But as long as they faced them together, hope would always have a place to grow. A few weeks later, autumn had surrendered to the first hints of winter. The morning air at Rattlesnake Creek Park was crisp and clean, the grass silver with frost where the sun hadn't yet melted it away. Families strolled the trails, bundled in scarves and flannel, children's laughter bouncing across the riverbank. At the edge of the parking lot, Grace watched as Tyler carefully helped Eli out of the truck. Every movement was measured and patient, a quiet celebration of how far they had come. Eli took a shaky step, gripping Dusty's lead rope. The mare stood quietly at his side, gentle and proud, her breath clouding in the air. The world seemed to pause in that moment. Grace held her own breath, watching Tyler and Eli, father and son, together, with Dusty's sturdy presence anchoring them both. Grace fell in beside them, her own heart pounding with a wild, almost childlike hope. They walked together, step by step, across the grassy field toward the winding creek. Each footfall left a mark in the dewy grass, a trail that was theirs alone. When they reached the water's edge, Eli looked back at his parents. "Can I walk with Dusty by myself?" he asked, his eyes full of excitement and the nervous thrill of newfound independence. Tyler glanced at Grace, who nodded, blinking back tears. They let go, staying close but not interfering as Eli took the lead. Dusty moved at his pace, steady and patient, as if she'd always known her job was to protect and encourage. The two of them moved along the creek, Eli's hand gripping the lead, his steps uneven but determined. Grace stood arm in arm with Tyler, her voice hushed. "Look at him. I never thought I'd see this day." Tyler squeezed her hand, voice rough with emotion. "He's a miracle, Grace. And so are you." They watched as Eli and Dusty reached a bend in the path where sunlight spilled through the trees. There, Eli paused, turned, and waved. "Come on, you have to see the view." Laughing, Grace and Tyler hurried to catch up, the air alive with the energy of hope. The family stood together by the creek, sunlight painting the water gold, Dusty's brown coat shining. As they rested, Grace found herself reflecting on all that had happened. The journey had forced her to confront every fear, every doubt, every illusion of control she'd clung to. But it had also brought them something far more precious than certainty. It had taught them the gift of connection, the courage of vulnerability, and the healing that could come from facing pain side by side. She thought about the long nights spent at Eli's bedside, Tyler's silent grief, Lauren's tireless support, and Dusty's unwavering loyalty. Each had played a part in their healing, a patchwork of love, resilience, and stubborn hope. Grace realized now that the real miracle was not just Eli's recovery, but the transformation of their family. They had learned to find each other in the struggle, to lean in rather than pull away. As the breeze stirred, Grace knelt beside Eli. "You know, sweetheart, healing comes in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's slow, and sometimes it's just about letting the people and animals we love stand with us when things get hard." Eli nodded, petting Dusty's nose. "She's my best friend. She never left." "That's right," Grace said softly. "None of us did. We might have gotten lost for a while, but we always found our way back." Tyler crouched down, his eyes full of wonder. "You gave us hope, Eli. More than you know." Eli looked at both his parents, a wisdom far beyond his years shining in his eyes. "We all helped each other. Even Dusty. She taught us to be patient." The riverbank was busy now, children skipping stones, couples wandering hand in hand. Yet Grace felt as if their little group stood in a world apart. She looked around and saw the truth she wanted to share. That healing was not a destination, but a journey, made up of small, brave choices. That being open with their pain had drawn them closer, not farther apart. That love, quiet, loyal, steadfast, had been their greatest medicine. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, Grace took a deep breath and spoke the lesson she'd carried in her heart. We lost the illusion that we could control everything, but we gained so much more. We learned to live with what is, to cherish each other, and to find joy even in the hardest days. Eli's healing was a miracle, but so was the way our family changed and grew together. Tyler nodded, voice gentle. Sometimes strength isn't about never breaking. It's about letting others help pick up the pieces. Grace looked down at Dusty, who had quietly carried so much of their hope. Animals like Dusty, they heal us in ways words can't. Their patience, their presence, their loyalty, that's a kind of wisdom too. She taught us to be present, to accept, to just be together. Eli grinned, swinging Dusty's lead rope, his steps sure and brave. I'm ready to go farther, Mom. I want to see what's next. Grace laughed, tears bright in her eyes. So do I, baby. So do I. As the last rays of sunlight danced on the river, the family stood in a circle, arms around each other, Dusty's gentle breath weaving through their midst. In that moment, Grace knew their story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, full of unknowns, but also full of hope. She looked up at the camera, whether real or imagined, and offered her final message, her heart full and strong. No life is free from pain, but if we keep our hearts open to each other, to joy, and to a horse who stood with us through the storm, then hope always has a place to grow. The screen faded to black as Eli and Dusty moved down the path, Grace and Tyler close behind, laughter rising above the sound of the creek. A gentle voiceover closed the story. If this journey touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more true stories of hope, healing, and the quiet courage that keeps us going.